Captain Lyra O'Connell stood at the edge of the ravaged planet, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The once thriving world had long since been reduced to a barren wasteland. The last remnants of its ancient civilization buried beneath dust and time. It wasn't supposed to end like this. This was supposed to be a simple scouting mission. Retrieve a few relics, make a quick profit, and return home. But when her ship, the Revenant, had landed on the dead world's surface, Lyra's sensors had picked up something more than ancient ruins. Beneath the desolate landscape, buried deep within the planet's crust, was something extraordinary, something far beyond the primitive technology of the other species that littered the galaxy. As Lyra and her crew of misfits climbed into the craggy mountain range, the ship's excavation crew worked frantically, digging through the debris to uncover what had been hidden away for millennia. The planet's surface was cracked, the deep scars of past battles visible in the jagged terrain. But it was not the planet's scars that captivated Lyra's attention. It was what lay beneath them. A massive colossal form, barely visible through the layers of dirt and rust, began to emerge as the excavation crews chipped away at the surface. At first, Lyra thought it was just another derelict ship, like many others scattered throughout the galaxy. But as the wreckage took shape, she realized this was something else entirely. This was a warship. No, a Titan, built for destruction on an unimaginable scale. The hull bore the marks of countless battles, evidence of an ancient war that had claimed both sides. "Captain, you need to see this," one of the engineers called out, his voice tinged with awe. Lyra approached, her boots crunching on the brittle ground. The sight before her was both terrifying and mesmerizing. The warship, far larger than any vessel she had ever seen, lay dormant, entombed in the dirt and time. Ancient markings adorned the ship's dark hull, strange symbols from a forgotten race. Yet, despite the ship's age, Lyra felt an undeniable hum of energy, a pulse deep within the wreckage, as if the ship was alive, waiting. "We found it," Lyra whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "This is it. This is the key." Her mind raced as possibilities flooded her thoughts. The Eclipse, as she would come to call it later, was more than just a relic. It was a weapon. And Lyra could feel it in her gut. This was the thing that could change everything. Humanity's chances of survival had been slim. Their technology was primitive at best, and their place in the galaxy had been one of weakness and submission. But this ship, this Titan, could level the playing field. It could give them a chance to rise. "Start preparing the excavation team," Lyra ordered, her voice steady despite the excitement bubbling beneath the surface. "We're going to bring this thing back to life." For a moment, she stood still, looking at the ship's broken frame, her mind racing. This would take everything they had, every resource, every ounce of willpower. But she was sure of one thing. Humanity could no longer be the galaxy's punching bag. It was time to rise, to fight, and to become something more than they were. As the crew began unloading equipment and preparing for the painstaking task ahead, Lyra couldn't help but smile. The Eclipse was just a skeleton now, but in time, it would become the weapon that would make the galaxy's most powerful species quiver. Humanity's ascension had just begun. The Eclipse had been half buried in the planet's surface for millennia, and getting it back to full functionality would take every ounce of creativity, patience, and grit the crew had. Lyra paced back and forth, her mind racing with plans as she watched the team begin the monumental task of restoring the warship. The ship wasn't just a technological marvel. It was a symbol of what humanity could achieve if they were given the chance, and Lyra knew that chance was now. "We're going to need a lot more than just duct tape and hope to get this thing running," said Marcus, the lead engineer. His gruff voice broke through the silence, drawing Lyra's attention. He stood by the ship's hull, holding a piece of alien technology that seemed to pulse with energy. "You're right," Lyra replied, her eyes narrowing. "But if anyone can make this work, it's us. Humans adapt. We innovate. We'll figure it out." The Eclipse was far more than just a large ship. It was a work of art, crafted by an ancient civilization that had long since disappeared. The sheer size of the warship alone was enough to leave most alien species in awe. Towering above them, the vessel's dark, angular structure was lined with strange symbols, some of which defied any known pattern. And its weapons, they were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Lyra's thoughts kept returning to the same question. Could they really bring this ship back to life? Could they make it work, even with all the challenges they would face? The engineers worked day and night, analyzing every part of the ship, figuring out how to repurpose its alien technology for human use. They found a power core unlike anything they had ever seen, a volatile yet powerful energy source that could potentially power the entire ship, but it was unstable and unpredictable. It would require delicate recalibration. "We'll need a new power converter," Marcus muttered as he examined the core. "Something that can handle this kind of output without blowing everything to hell." Lyra nodded. She'd never been an engineer, but she understood the importance of what they were doing. "Find a way, Marcus. We don't have time to waste." Over the next few weeks, the crew of the Revenant worked tirelessly. The ship was slowly coming to life, piece by piece. The massive engines, once silent and still, began to hum with activity. The weapons systems, once dormant, flickered to life, their targeting systems locked on distant objects in the galaxy. The crew worked together, overcoming countless obstacles, alien interfaces, unfamiliar materials, and limited resources. Yet every failure brought them closer to their goal. Lyra couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They weren't just fixing a ship, they were rebuilding hope. With each completed repair, she could feel the Eclipse growing stronger, more alive. This ship would be their answer to the galaxy's relentless threats. No longer would humanity be seen as insignificant. As the crew worked through the grueling weeks, rumors of their progress spread. Lyra knew the rest of the galaxy was watching. Some species would be curious, some would be fearful, and some might even try to stop them. The Eclipse was humanity's greatest weapon. If it was finished, it could change everything. "Captain, we're close," Marcus called from the ship's control room. "The power core is stable, and we've got the first test flight prepped. Just a few more tweaks, and we'll be ready for a full systems check." Lyra walked over, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment they'd all been working toward. They weren't just building a weapon, they were building the future. "We launch tomorrow," she said, her voice firm. "The Eclipse will rise, and the galaxy will know that humanity is no longer the underdog. It's time to show them what we're made of." The crew cheered, their exhaustion forgotten in the moment of triumph. They had turned a pile of scrap into a symbol of humanity's resilience, and now they were ready to unleash that power. But even as they celebrated, Lyra knew the real battle was only just beginning. The galaxy was full of predators, and they had just set the stage for the greatest fight of their lives. The Eclipse was taking shape, but the journey to bring it fully to life was far from smooth. Every day presented new challenges, each more daunting than the last. The crew, once full of enthusiasm and hope, now found themselves strained under the weight of their mission. As they continued to rebuild the warship, the pressure was mounting. They weren't just repairing an ancient relic, they were shaping humanity's future, and it felt like every mistake, every setback, could cost them everything. In the cramped corridors of the Eclipse, Lyra stood at the command center, staring at the screens that displayed systems failing, then succeeding, then failing again. The power core, despite all their work, remained volatile. Some of the alien components refused to integrate with the human modifications. At times, it felt like no matter how hard they tried, they were always one step behind. "Captain, we've got a problem," Marcus called from the engine bay, his voice crackling over the comms. "The new energy converter, it's not syncing with the core. If we push it too hard, we risk a catastrophic overload." Lyra took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. They didn't have the luxury of time. Every moment spent on repairs was a moment their enemies had to prepare for their inevitable confrontation. She had no choice but to push forward. "We can't afford to wait any longer," Lyra replied, her voice steady. "Get your team to double-check the converter. I need that power to stabilize, Marcus. If we're going to survive, we need to make this ship ready for combat." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, her fingers tapping against the console. The weight of leadership was heavier than ever. It wasn't just her crew's survival that was at stake. It was humanity's entire future, and every decision she made could either lead them to glory or to ruin. The work continued, but the days grew longer and more tense. Arguments broke out between crew members, each person feeling the strain of the impossible task. The once tight team began to show cracks. Some members doubted the project, questioning if they were even capable of completing it. Was it worth it? Was this ancient warship really the key to humanity's survival, or had they been chasing a fantasy? One evening, as the crew gathered around the mess hall, Lyra overheard a heated discussion between two of her officers, Lieutenant Soren and Lieutenant Hall. Their voices were rising, the tension in the air thick with frustration. "She's asking too much of us," Hall said, his voice sharp. "We can't just force alien tech to work. We need more time. More resources. We don't have time." Soren snapped. "If we don't finish this soon, we're dead. Every day we wait, we're giving them a chance to destroy us." Lyra stepped forward, silencing the room. Her presence commanded attention as she locked eyes with both officers. "You're right," she said, her voice firm but calm. "We're pushing ourselves to the limit, but you're wrong if you think we don't have a choice. We must finish this, or humanity is as good as gone. We're the underdogs, and the Eclipse is the only chance we have to rise above. I don't expect this to be easy, but I do expect you to give everything you've got." The room was silent as Lyra's words hung in the air. One by one, the crew nodded, determination returning to their eyes. The fire of purpose reignited, even in the face of mounting uncertainty. In the following days, a shift took place within the crew. The doubts didn't vanish, but they were replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. If the Eclipse was to be humanity's weapon, it wouldn't just be made of metal and circuits. It would be forged in the hearts of those who believed in it. Progress came slowly but steadily. Marcus's team, after several sleepless nights, managed to stabilize the power core, and the ship's engines roared to life for the first time in centuries. The hull, which had once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, was now being repaired and reinforced. The weapons systems, while still temperamental, began to respond to human commands. "We're getting close," Marcus said, his voice crackling with excitement as he ran a diagnostic on the weapons systems. "The Eclipse is alive. It's almost ready." Lyra stood by the window of the bridge, gazing out at the stars. She felt the weight of their work, the endless hours, the frustration and sacrifice. But now, as she looked at the ship, half-finished, yet full of promise, she knew one thing for certain. The Eclipse was humanity's future, and they would see it through, no matter the cost. The first full systems test of the Eclipse was set for dawn, the moment of truth. The crew, now battle-hardened from weeks of long hours, late-night arguments, and moments of doubt, gathered in silence, each person knowing that the time had finally come to see if all their sacrifices had been worth it. Lyra stood on the bridge, staring at the ship's colossal form through the observation window. The Eclipse was now more than just a warship. It was a promise, a symbol of humanity's fight to rise above its station. But even as she watched, the uncertainty lingered. They had put everything into this moment. If it failed, they would be back at square one. Worse, they might never get another chance. Powering up the core, Marcus's voice came over the comms, sharp and confident. "All systems are green. We're ready for the test." Lyra felt her heartbeat quicken. This was no longer a ship, it was a weapon. One that could change the course of history. Her hand instinctively moved to the console, where she would take command of the test flight. The air on the bridge was thick with anticipation. Initiating primary systems, she said, her voice steady despite the weight on her shoulders. Let's see if we can make history. A hum vibrated through the ship as the power core came to life, its energy flooding the Eclipse. Lights flickered on, and the ship's hull seemed to pulse, as though awakening from a long slumber. Systems that had been dormant for centuries sprang to life, sending flickers of blue light across the warship's dark surface. Then came the engines. The roar of them brought a rush of adrenaline through the crew. They had worked tirelessly to restore the Eclipse's ancient propulsion system, and now, for the first time in over a millennium, the ship began to move. Engines at full throttle, Marcus reported, his voice betraying a hint of excitement. The ship's alive, Captain. We've got full control. Lyra's hand hovered over the command panel as the Eclipse slowly lifted from the surface of the dead planet. The moment it rose, even by a few meters, Lyra felt a shiver of awe. The ship was massive, larger than anything humanity had ever built, but it was graceful, almost elegant in the way it hovered, defying the natural law of its ancient design. Steady, Lyra murmured. Let's take her out for a spin. The crew watched, breathless, as the Eclipse lifted higher, its shadow stretching across the planet's barren surface. The sheer scale of the ship was incomprehensible, and for a fleeting moment, Lyra was struck by a sense of how small they all were, yet how far they had come. From forgotten scavengers on the fringes of the galaxy to the owners of this mighty titan. She powered the ship forward, the control stick responding almost instantly to her commands. The Eclipse cut through the atmosphere with a grace that defied its massive size, and Lyra's heart surged with exhilaration. It was working. But then, without warning, the ship shuddered. A jolt ran through the bridge as alarms began to blare. Lyra's eyes snapped to the monitors. The ship was losing power to the main thrusts. Captain, we've got a problem. Marcus's voice crackled over the comms. It's the engine coupling. It's not maintaining the output we need. Lyra's stomach dropped. The Eclipse was no longer a lifeless hulk. It was a fragile, living thing, and it was on the brink of failure. She couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not when they were so close. Abort the test, she ordered, her voice sharp. Divert all power to the secondary engines. Stabilize. The crew scrambled to execute her orders, but Lyra's mind was already working ahead, calculating what needed to be done. In that moment of chaos, she remembered the ancient warship's original designs, its weaknesses and strengths. If they could patch the coupling and redirect the energy, they could push the ship forward. They had to make it work. Give me manual control, Lyra said to Marcus, her voice low but resolute. She wasn't going to let the Eclipse fall now, not after everything they had fought for. The console before her flickered, and the response came instantaneously. Lyra took full control of the ship's movements, her fingers flying across the console as she calculated the next steps. The Eclipse groaned as it fought to stay afloat, but Lyra refused to back down. A moment of pure focus passed before the ship's engines roared back to life. Slowly, with cautious precision, the Eclipse regained its stability. The secondary engines kicked in, stabilizing the ship enough to hover, but the damage had been done. They couldn't push it too far just yet. Lyra knew they were running out of time. Stabilized, Marcus reported, his voice tinged with both relief and regret. We'll need to overhaul the main engines before we attempt any more flights. Lyra took a long breath, staring out at the distant stars. The Eclipse was alive, but barely. She had no illusions about how far they still had to go. Yet, even with the setback, a spark of hope flared within her. They had brought the beast back to life. And now, they would make it unstoppable. We're not done yet, she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. This is just the beginning. The Eclipse had been brought to life, but the galaxy would not wait. Lyra knew that the moment they launched, they were bound to attract attention. The ship's power, its potential, it would not go unnoticed. The moment the Eclipse had awoken, The tides of war had already begun to shift. What they had created wasn't just a marvel of technology. It was a threat to every power in the galaxy. "Captain, we've detected multiple incoming ships," Lieutenant Soren reported, his voice tight with tension. "Unknown signature. They're fast. They're on an intercept course." Lyra's blood ran cold. She glanced at the radar display. A series of blips were rapidly approaching from the edge of the system. These ships weren't friendly. They weren't even human. The designs were sleek, aggressive, and very familiar. The Zitherans. The Zitharan Empire had been one of the galaxy's most oppressive powers, a military dictatorship that had crushed entire planets beneath its heel. Humanity had barely escaped their notice, always staying beneath the radar, content to remain unnoticed in the galaxy's vast expanse. But that was before they had found the Eclipse. Now, with the Zitherans closing in, Lyra knew they could never go back to being unnoticed. "They've picked up our signal," Lyra muttered, her mind racing. "We've been found. All right, everyone, brace yourselves." The crew sprang into action. Lyra's thoughts were a blur, but one thing was clear: they weren't ready for a fight. The Eclipse was still in the middle of a long and dangerous overhaul, but there was no choice now. They had to be ready, or humanity's grand ambition would end before it even began. "Power up the weapons systems," Lyra barked. "Weapons crew, stand by. I want full targeting readiness within 2 minutes." The crew was moving quickly, despite the uncertainty that loomed over them. Everyone knew that the Eclipse had weapons, huge, destructive weapons, but no one knew if they were fully functional yet. They had only just managed to test the engines and propulsion. The ship's weapons systems had been a secondary concern until now. "We're activating the forward cannons," Marcus called from the weapons bay. "Engaging targeting systems." "Make it quick," Lyra said, her heart pounding. "We need firepower now." The comms crackled as the Zitharan ships closed in on their position. They were fast, too fast, and within minutes, Lyra could see them on the visual feed. Sleek, metallic vessels gliding toward the Eclipse like sharks circling their prey. "Captain, they're hailing us," Soren reported. "It's the Zitharan Admiral." Lyra stood still for a moment. The Zitharans weren't known for making peaceful contact. The message was clear. They were here to neutralize the Eclipse before it could pose any threat. Humanity's fight for survival had just become a race against time. "Put him through," Lyra ordered, her voice cold. The screen flickered, and a tall, intimidating Zitharan appeared on the display. His face was cold, his expression devoid of mercy. The Zitharans were a fierce race, known for their brutal efficiency in battle. The Admiral's uniform was adorned with countless battle honors, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, were focused solely on Lyra. "You have one chance to stand down," the Admiral said, his voice deep and authoritative. "This ship you've uncovered is an abomination, and it will not be allowed to exist. Surrender now, and we will let your people live." Lyra's grip tightened on the console. She knew what the Admiral was trying to do. Trying to break her, to make her fold. But she couldn't. Not now. Not after everything they had sacrificed. "You don't understand," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the tension. "We are not the ones who should fear you. You've underestimated humanity for too long. This ship is ours now, and we will fight for it. We will fight for our future." The Admiral's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the silence was thick. Then he spoke, his tone heavy with menace. "You will regret this decision, human. Prepare to be destroyed." With that, the communication ended abruptly, leaving Lyra in the quiet aftermath. The Zitharans would attack. There was no question about that. But the Eclipse, this ship they had brought back from the dead, was their only chance to survive. Lyra had always known that the galaxy would never let them rise without a fight. But now she had a weapon unlike anything the Zitharans had ever seen. "Prepare for battle," Lyra said, turning back to the crew. "Target their engines first. We're not just defending ourselves. We're showing the galaxy what humanity can do." The crew was already in motion, the adrenaline surging through them as the first Zitharan ships came into range. Lyra's fingers danced across the controls, her mind focused and determined. The Eclipse was still imperfect, still raw, but it was their only chance to fight back. As the first blast from the Zitharan ship streaked toward them, Lyra gave the order. Fire. The first blast from the Zitharan ships struck the Eclipse's outer hull with a deafening impact, sending a tremor through the entire ship. The alarms blared as sparks flew from various systems. The Eclipse shuddered, its energy shield flaring bright as it absorbed the blast. It was strong, but the Zitharans didn't care. They had come for one reason: to destroy humanity's greatest weapon before it had a chance to change the galaxy. Lyra gripped the armrests of her captain's chair, her eyes glued to the battle display. Her mind raced, calculating options as the enemy ships closed in for another strike. There were 6 of them, each one sleek and deadly, their weapons built for swift, overwhelming attacks. The Eclipse had the advantage of size and firepower, but it was still a work in progress. The weapon systems hadn't been fully calibrated, and the ship's engines were temperamental. "We're taking fire," Soren shouted from his station. "Shields are holding, but we can't take many more hits like that." "Return fire," Lyra ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. "Lock onto their lead ship and fire everything we've got." The crew moved in perfect synchronization, their nerves steeled from weeks of relentless work. Marcus, who had been overseeing the weapon systems, called out to confirm their readiness. "Cannons are powered and locked," he said, "firing in 3, 2. The Eclipse's massive forward cannons erupted with a brilliant, blinding flash, sending a concentrated pulse of energy toward the lead Zitharan ship. The blast tore through the Zitharan shields, the shockwave sending the ship spiraling away, its systems disabled by the powerful hit. It was a victory, but only a small one. The remaining 5 Zitharan ships immediately altered course, veering to avoid the incoming fire while simultaneously launching retaliatory strikes. Their plasma weapons, powerful and fast, rained down on the Eclipse, striking her shields in rapid succession. The ship groaned as it absorbed each hit, the hum of energy shields straining with each impact. "We're not going to last long like this," Marcus called out. "The shield generators are overloading. If we don't get the secondary systems online, we're going to be sitting ducks." Lyra's eyes flickered to the damage reports. The Eclipse was being tested like never before, and they were barely hanging on. She had to think fast. There was no way to outrun the Zitharan ships. They were faster, more maneuverable, and the Eclipse had to rely on its brute force, which wasn't fully stabilized. "Focus all firepower on their engines," Lyra barked. "We disable their ships, we win this fight. Keep them from escaping or regrouping." Her crew responded with precision. The Eclipse's cannons fired again, this time aimed directly at the engines of the second Zitharan ship. The massive pulse of energy ripped through the ship's rear shields, sending flames erupting from its hull. The ship faltered in its flight, struggling to regain control as it slowly lost speed. A second ship fell back as well, its weapons flickering in and out. But the remaining ships were relentless. They had not come to retreat. They had come to destroy. The Zitharans closed in again, firing multiple volleys of plasma beams. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as the Eclipse rocked from the blasts. Sparks flew across the bridge, and warning lights flashed everywhere. The crew moved swiftly to counteract the damage. "Captain, secondary engines are online," Marcus reported, his voice tense. "We've got a boost to maneuverability." Lyra's mind snapped into focus. This was their moment. The Zitharans were closing in for a final attack, but the Eclipse wasn't helpless. It was more than a ship. It was humanity's last stand. They weren't just defending a piece of technology. They were defending their future. "Full power to the secondary engines," Lyra ordered. "I want full speed. Bring us in close for a flanking run." Without hesitation, The crew complied. The Eclipse surged forward, using its newly activated secondary engines to increase speed and maneuverability. The massive ship, still a hulking force of metal and power, swerved like a predatory animal, its weapons lining up perfectly with the remaining Zitharan ships. Lyra's fingers danced across the console, recalibrating the targeting system in real time. Fire. The Eclipse unleashed a devastating salvo of energy blasts, each one hitting its mark with pinpoint accuracy. One of the Zitharan ships exploded in a burst of fiery debris, its shields unable to withstand the concentrated assault. Another ship followed suit, its engines rupturing and sending it careening into the cold depths of space. But as two ships fell, the remaining Zitharans regrouped. Their ships moved with frightening precision, countering the Eclipse's movements and firing relentless plasma blasts. Lyra watched, a bead of sweat running down her face. The odds were still stacked against them, but the Eclipse was now proving its worth. "Captain," Soren's voice cut through the noise. "We've got a lock on the last ship's core. One shot, and we can disable it for good." "Do it," Lyra commanded. Her voice was firm, the weight of her leadership settling in. The crew's focus intensified. The Eclipse powered up its final shot, aiming directly at the core of the Zitharan flagship. In the next instant, a blinding flash of energy surged forward, striking the core with a thunderous impact. The Zitharan ship shuddered violently, its weapons falling silent. The threat was over. Silence followed, punctuated only by the crackling of systems coming back online. Lyra leaned back in her chair, her hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. The battle was won, for now, but she knew this victory was only the beginning. "Prepare for pursuit," Lyra said quietly, her eyes scanning the stars beyond the Eclipse. "The galaxy will notice our power now. We can't afford to relax. We've shown them our strength, but they'll come again." The Eclipse had survived its first real test, and humanity had proven its worth. But the road ahead would be filled with even greater challenges. For now, though, they had emerged victorious. And that would have to be enough. The Eclipse hung motionless in space, its massive frame scarred from battle but still intact. The remnants of the Zitharan fleet were scattered across the void, wreckage floating like broken bones in a battlefield. The crew had done what they thought was impossible. Against overwhelming odds, they had repelled the Zitharan Empire's attack. For now, they were safe, but Lyra knew better than to believe the calm would last. "Status report," Lyra said, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of the recent conflict. Soren, who had been monitoring the ship's systems, glanced up from his station, his expression grim. "The Eclipse is still intact, but we're not out of the woods yet. The shields are down to 30% capacity, and several power conduits were damaged in the battle. We've got work ahead of us." Lyra nodded. The victory was bittersweet. The Eclipse had proved itself, but it had also shown how fragile their situation truly was. They couldn't afford to rest, not with the Zitharans, or worse, aware of their presence. "Get the repair teams working on it immediately," she ordered. "We can't afford to be caught off guard again." "Understood, Captain," Marcus replied from the engineering station, his tone curt but focused. "We'll start rerouting power to the most critical systems." Lyra turned her attention to the tactical console, where the empty space around them filled with eerie quiet. The enemy fleet was gone, but a sense of unease settled over her. Victory didn't always bring peace. Sometimes it only attracted more danger. "Have we detected any more Zitharan ships?" she asked, her eyes scanning the stars. "No," Soren replied, his fingers flying over the controls. "But they've got long-range detection systems. If they have any ships within the vicinity, they'll know we're still alive. We need to leave this system. Fast." Lyra rubbed her temples. She knew Soren was right. They couldn't stay here. Not when the Zitharans could be preparing a larger fleet to finish what they'd started. But leaving the system wasn't a simple choice. The Eclipse needed repairs, and the crew needed time to recover. There was too much at stake to make a rash decision. "We'll need to jump to a nearby uncharted system," Lyra said, her mind working through the options. "Somewhere off the grid, where we can hide long enough to make the repairs we need. It's a risk, but it's our only option." "Agreed," Soren said. "I'll chart a course for the Zarin Drift. It's a remote area of space. We'll be off the radar there." Lyra nodded, making the call. She didn't have time to hesitate. "Set course for the Zarin Drift. Full speed ahead. We need to be gone before anyone realizes we've survived." As the Eclipse's engines powered up, and the ship turned toward the uncharted system, Lyra stood, her gaze once again falling on the vast expanse of space. The stars glittered like cold fire, indifferent to the lives of those who fought beneath them. It had been a hard-won victory, but there was no time to celebrate. The Zitharan Empire had tasted defeat, but they would return. Lyra knew that all too well. Ambush. The Zarin Drift was nothing like the calm, empty stretches of space Lyra had hoped for. It was a dense cluster of rogue asteroids and ion storms, a place where navigational data was nearly useless and star maps could be more dangerous than helpful. It was the perfect hiding spot for a ship like the Eclipse, but it came with its own risks. The storm clouds around them crackled with charged particles, creating unpredictable hazards that could disable even the Eclipse's advanced systems. "Captain," Soren's voice crackled over the comms. "I'm picking up a faint signal. It's encrypted, but I'm getting a ping from deep within the drift. We might not be alone." Lyra's pulse quickened. Her gut tightened. Could it be another Zitharan ship, waiting in ambush? Or perhaps a pirate faction, taking advantage of the chaos? She didn't know, but they couldn't afford to take chances. "Red alert," she ordered, her voice sharp. "Divert all power to shields and weapons. We won't take any risks. Soren, track that signal. We're not leaving this system until we know what it is." The crew scrambled to their stations, working quickly to prepare for the worst. The Eclipse was not at full strength, but it was still a formidable force. Lyra couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. Minutes passed, stretching into tense silence. The storm clouds outside raged, lightning flashing across the expanse as Soren worked to track the signal. Every now and then, the Eclipse would shudder from the violent electromagnetic interference in the drift, but nothing materialized. It felt too quiet, almost unnervingly so. Then, just as Lyra began to think they might be safe, the comms crackled again. "This is Admiral Vareth of the Zitharan fleet." A cold, emotionless voice rang out. "You've been found." Lyra's heart dropped. The Zitharans had tracked them after all. The war was far from over, and now they would face the consequences. "Captain," Soren said urgently, "I'm reading multiple ships emerging from the storm. Their signatures are consistent with the last fleet we encountered." Lyra stood, her jaw clenched in determination. The Eclipse had been born from nothing, forged from the ashes of a dying civilization. It had survived one attack, but it wasn't going to survive this ambush unless they acted fast. "Bring up our shields to maximum. Weapons systems, full power. Engage at will. Prepare for battle." The Eclipse roared to life as Lyra's voice echoed through the ship. The battle was about to begin, and this time they were outnumbered. But humanity had learned to survive against impossible odds. And this time, they would fight back. The Eclipse hummed with tension as the Zitharan fleet emerged from the storm clouds of the Zarin Drift, its ships materializing from the chaos like hunters stalking prey. Lyra stood at the helm, her eyes locked onto the tactical map as the cold, ruthless face of Admiral Vareth appeared on the communication screen. His image was clear, his expression unreadable. "I told you this would happen, Captain," Vareth's voice rang out, his tone both disdainful and confident. "You have nowhere to run now. Your ship, your people, will fall." Lyra's grip tightened around the command chair, her knuckles white. "You may have tracked us here, but you still don't understand what the Eclipse is capable of." Vareth's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no humor in it. Your defiance is impressive, but futile. The Zitharan Empire does not lose. Surrender now, and I may spare your lives. The crew of the Eclipse gathered behind Lyra, their expressions filled with determination. They had already fought once and emerged victorious. But this time, there were more enemies. And this time, they were surrounded. Lyra knew they couldn't afford to back down, not with the future of humanity hanging in the balance. Not today, Admiral, Lyra replied, her voice steady, unwavering. We'll fight for every inch of this galaxy if we have to. With that, she turned to her crew. Prepare for the final engagement. This is the battle for humanity's future. We hold nothing back. The clash of titans. Target the lead ship's weapons array, Lyra ordered, her mind working in overdrive. Disable their ability to return fire. We're not giving them a chance to regroup. Soren's hands flew over the controls. Course laid in, Captain. Charging weapon systems now. The Eclipse's massive form shifted, its engines roaring to life as the ship powered forward, engaging the remaining Zitharan fleet. It was a desperate, bold move. The ship was still being repaired, still imperfect, but it was humanity's last hope. Lyra wasn't going to let it fall now. Cannons locked. Marcus called out from the weapons station. Firing in 3, 2. A pulse of raw, concentrated energy lashed out from the Eclipse's forward cannons, cutting through the void like a blazing comet. The energy blast hit the lead Zitharan ship square in its weapons array, detonating with a violent burst. Sparks flew from the hull of the ship, and the once imposing vessel spiraled out of control, its weapons now inoperable. Direct hit. One down. Marcus shouted, but there was no time for celebration. The remaining Zitharan ships were closing in fast, their weapons blazing with deadly precision. Lyra's eyes darted to the remaining ships on the radar. They were fast, too fast, and despite their damaged shields, the Zitharans showed no sign of retreat. The battle was turning into a desperate, all-or-nothing struggle for the Eclipse's survival. Shields holding at 20%, Captain, Soren called. We can't take many more hits. Keep us moving. Lyra barked. We're not standing still for them to take us down. Full speed, evasive maneuvers. The Eclipse roared as it accelerated, weaving through the storm-choked field of asteroids and ion clouds, using the environment as cover to avoid the concentrated fire from the enemy ships. It was a race against time. The Eclipse could take damage, but it couldn't afford to sustain any more heavy hits. Every shot they fired was a gamble. Every maneuver could be their last. But as the Eclipse twisted and turned, it became clear that the Zitharans had underestimated humanity's ingenuity. They were relentless, yes, but they had no experience fighting with the same kind of desperation Lyra and her crew had. The Eclipse wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of human willpower. Captain. Soren's voice was urgent. A third of their fleet is down, but they've just deployed reinforcements from the rear. It's a full-scale ambush. Lyra cursed under her breath. The Zitharans had been waiting for this moment. They had prepared for a final strike, hoping to catch the Eclipse in a position where it couldn't escape. And now, with a fresh wave of enemies, the battle felt like it was slipping away. But Lyra refused to back down. Humanity's last stand. Full power to the engines, she commanded, her voice cold with resolve. We're not just fighting for survival, we're fighting for our right to exist. The Eclipse roared again as it surged forward, blasting through the surrounding asteroid field at breakneck speed. The Zitharans, momentarily caught off guard, struggled to keep up with the sudden acceleration of the human ship. The Eclipse wasn't just fast, it was strategic. Every move they made, every blast they fired, was a calculated risk to turn the tide of battle. And then, it happened. Captain, we've got a direct shot at their command ship, Marcus called out, his voice tinged with excitement. We can hit their core, one shot, and they're done for. Lyra didn't hesitate. Do it. This ends now. In one fluid motion, Marcus fired the final shot. The pulse of energy shot forward, cutting through the void and slamming into the heart of the Zitharan flagship. The explosion was instantaneous, an enormous burst of light that turned the command ship into a massive fireball, its debris scattering in all directions. The remaining Zitharan ships faltered, their coordination disrupted by the loss of their command ship. They tried to regroup, but the Eclipse wasn't finished. The final battleship attempted to flee, but it was too late. Lyra's voice rang out through the comms. "Prepare to fire the final salvo." The last blast from the Eclipse's weapons tore through the final Zitharan ship's engines, sending it careening into a nearby asteroid. The battle was over. The Eclipse had won. The Eclipse hung in the aftermath of the battle, its crew battered but alive. The air on the bridge was thick with the hum of systems stabilizing and the weight of victory settling in. Lyra stood, her gaze fixed on the stars outside. The battle had been won, but it was clear that the war was far from over. Humanity had taken its first steps into a new era, and it had done so with force. But now, as they looked to the future, Lyra knew that the true test was only just beginning. The Eclipse had become more than a ship. It was humanity's symbol of hope, a reminder to the galaxy that they would never back down. "We've won today," Lyra said, turning to her crew. "But we've only just begun. The galaxy is watching us now, and we will show them that humanity's strength is limitless." The battle for the galaxy had begun, and humanity, led by the might of the Eclipse, would shape the future on its own terms.